Yeah, thank you very much, Ina. I would also like to welcome you all, especially our guest and speaker today, Andrei. I had the pleasure and honor to be an external examiner or reviewer of his PhD. So I visited Malmö, the World Maritime University, and was really impressed by how he managed to navigate all the questions in the 4 hours viva. So again, congratulations, Andrei, for this really excellent work. And I'm also happy that you join us here today and share your perspective with our audience. I think your work is extremely important. And I also look forward to hear specifically what a perspective from the South can look like on science diplomacy. So thank you very much for joining, and welcome everybody to this last session of our ocean seminar before the new year.
Perfect. Also from my side, welcome everyone, and also welcome to the new participants who join in for the first time. This is really a space for everyone interested in ocean issues to discuss informally about our research, about what our experts can share, and also your experiences with your work and your specific interests. So as Elisa already said, we welcome Dr. Andrei Polejack with us today to discuss this recent preprint of his research. So this is something that is not yet published and maybe even more interesting for us to discuss in this forum. And as some of you know, with Maripol data, we're closely following the legally binding agreement, the negotiations for a legally binding agreement for the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. And so does Andrei. And of course, Maripol data is looking into the science policy interfaces in this regard. And interestingly, of course, Andrei is both in politics and in the government, but also in the science. So that's particularly interesting also for us to discuss later on. We also have our discussant today, Dr. Christelle Renaud, who is a postdoctoral researcher in the Maripol Data Project, who will summarize a few or highlight a few points for discussion, and then we will open it up for the group to ask your questions or also comment and engage a little bit in the discussion. So with this, I would like to introduce you to Andrei Polejack. He's a senior advisor for the Brazilian Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation. He's a PhD in Maritime Affairs from the WMU-Sasakawa Global Ocean Institute of the World Maritime University in Sweden, and has a Master of Science in Evolutionary Ecology. He is a former coordinator for oceans, Antarctica and Geosciences in Brazil, and used to coordinate the national ocean and polar research programs, providing technical advice to governance, formulating and implementing public policies, and negotiating international agreements, among other tasks. As a transdisciplinary researcher, Andrei is interested in ocean science diplomacy as a field of study, seeking to understand the role of science and scientists in international ocean affairs, along with the political sphere of power dynamics and interests in the marine realm. Theoretically passionate about post- and de-colonial reasoning applied to international relations and its many ways of linking with ocean science. So therefore, this session will be interesting for you interested in ocean issues, but also in the global north, global south debate. And with this, I hand over to Andrei for the presentation, and thank you everyone again for joining me.
Thank you, dear Ina. Thank you, Professor Vadro. And I do hope as well that people will enjoy. Let me share it is my intent to give this very brief presentation and then follow with more interaction with the audience. I'm here to hear you and to learn from you more than, to present actually. So the theme today is about science diplomacy in marine biodiversity negotiations, but I wanted this to be framed in a perspective from the global south, and I'll tell you just why. First, we need to start by the beginning. So what do I mean by science diplomacy? And why does it matter for marine biodiversity negotiations? Well, I'd like to say that science diplomacy is an umbrella term that gathers all the phenomena that results from the interaction of research and international affairs. It's a highly contested term. It's very new and emerging, but it's being more and more mainstreamed. So there are two different taxonomies that I like to call. The first one came from 2010 from the Royal Society and AAAS, in which science and diplomacy interact in three different ways. Science in diplomacy is how science can provide advice to inform diplomacy. Diplomacy for science is when diplomacy comes and finds funding and ways of gathering researchers and promoting science. And finally, science for diplomacy, which is the use of science for alleviate political tensions between countries. But then Peter Gluckman and colleagues in 2018, they pointed out that this first taxonomy with the three different boxes, they completely lack a very big important part of science diplomacy, which is the interests. So they say that science diplomacy is about first, national interests, second, cross-border interests, which would be like a regional science diplomacy, and then three, global interests. But as I pointed out, it is a concept that is still under dispute, and it's been mainstream by the policy world. It's been promoted more by policymakers than from researchers. So in turn, academia is requesting more and more empirical evidence of how science and diplomacy interact with each other. And I find that it is still today very Western-centered, the concept of science diplomacy in itself, because in general, science diplomacy narratives, they assume a certain science as an universal, neutral, and uncontested science that is actually helping countries to achieve better coordination. However, what does it really happen when you combine science and diplomacy? There are bright spots, of course, but there are also downsides. So the bright spot is the narrative that we have today on the global challenges pushes science to be more present into decision-making, in a sense that with more science, we would be having better informed decision-making at the international level. However, the questions about who finances that science, what kind of science is being made, and for which purpose might raise. So there are dubious interests at play. So for instance, like with what happened to the tobacco industry many years ago. So a lot of science was done telling actually people that smoking was good, when in fact those researchers were dubious in their findings. So we also live that, especially in the marine biodiversity realm, especially when you're playing with such high stakes, such as big fisheries industries and oil and gas in the ocean, and the cables and transportation and commerce. So we gotta be caution on what kind of sciences that we're talking about. And diplomats know that very well. So what is the importance exactly of this science diplomacy that I just mentioned to ocean affairs? Well, there are two papers that I like to point out. The first one was written by Sam Rambison with a more historical perspective on how central science and scientific findings were to the negotiation of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, like the Constitution of the Ocean, right? So because of what people thought we would be doing in this deep sea, a lot of provisions were adopted in UNCLOS, especially to benefit the global south, because we lack the capacity or the human and technical capacities for ocean exploitation. And the second paper is, it was actually my first paper for my PhD, in which I framed all those taxonomies into what do they mean to the ocean affairs. And that is, for me, absolutely something essential to ocean affairs, because science has been there, even in provisions of the convention that we don't usually see science. For instance, on dispute settlement. So you need to know where's your shorelines, where are the baselines, how do you start counting the 200 nautical miles that compose your economic exclusive zone, for one thing, right? So I call for a specific term for ocean science diplomacy, because it is different than the land-based science diplomacy. It is, you have anarchic systems, you have the high seas, such as the negotiations that we have been living for, the BBNJ, you have the common heritage of men, of humankind, so many different things that happen when you lose the geopolitical boundaries that we live in land. So the narratives, as I told, behind the Anthropocene, doom and gloom, climate change, etc., they are asking for more science, right? So I advocate that science diplomacy in the ocean should be used for inclusivity, sustainability, to fight inequalities, and to promote community interests, because we are talking about a common good, right? So why a global south perspective? And I want to point that global south is a highly contested term. But for me, in my personal belief, it's better than the other terms, which are developing world, third world, because all those terms kind of denote a hierarchy of a superior and inferior. And global south is just a matter of south and north, but at the same time, the global south is not in the south hemisphere of the planet. So it is highly contested. And again, we do have, when we use terms such as this, you run the risk of getting into the binary logic that I will be speaking about. So why global south perspective, and why does it matter for marine biodiversity negotiations? Well, for one, if you look at the Global Ocean Science Report from 2020 from IOC UNESCO, you see that the number of research vessels that are actually oceanic, that are big and can do ocean science, which is one tiny part of the ocean sciences, they actually belong all to the global north. Only a few countries have that capacity. So the ships are not there, right? Second, if you look at this paper that came out of Maritime Polejack, and I love this one, the usual suspects, and you see this relationship between the people that are publishing, but who are getting cited by other academics. So you see that there's a trend to benefit, to profit global north countries in high number of citations. So which means that although we do have some capacity and we are producing science, that science is not reaching everybody, it's not being mainstreamed and promoted. So there are specific ways of doing science in the global south. So I say that international relations cannot be understood without history and how the world became to be as it is today. So if we are dealing with the BBNJ, first you need to know how UNCLOS was negotiated, why we're adopting and implementing agreement, a legally binding implementing agreement under UNCLOS and not another treaty, right? And I'd like to show this. So the world that we know today, this is the Mercator projection, right? So this is the common map that everybody says. But in fact, what this map should look like, it's something like this. And it's fun to see that how we enlarged almost all the countries in the global north, in the north hemisphere, I'm sorry. And we did keep the other countries in the same. So we tend to see the world from a very specific projection, right? And then I find myself dealing with two theories that really have informed my work. The first is the post-colonial theory that states that we cannot understand the world today without understanding the impacts of colonization, of European colonization. So what the post-colonial theory defends is that the value system imposed by the European colonization has shaped reality as we know it. It set a scale of humanity and abides many to exogenous senses of right and wrong. So the church, Christianism, and all of this, and even the philosophy that came from Greece and Rome empires, those are all the reality that we have shaped, but those were not the reality of many of the colonized people. And so the colonizer or the settler, it signifies the colonized. It says who those bodies are, who those people are. And the colonized can only find its worth in that value system that was imposed to them. So they need to find a place in the work labor. They need to find a place that is worth into that value system. By doing that, the oppressed or the colonized wishes to become the oppressor, the colonizer. It wants to resemble that. So a fun fact in this is that the centrality of the Atlantic in the European colonization would be one big reason why we should be studying ocean science diplomacy, and specifically in the Atlantic. So I'd like to point out this quote from Aimé Césaire, which is a discourse on colonialism from 1955. So he says that whether one likes it or not, at the end of the blind alley, that is Europe, I mean the Europe, Adenauer, Schumann, Biddle, and a few others, there's Hitler. And at the end of capitalism, which is eager to outlive its day, there's Hitler. At the end of formal humanism and philosophic renunciation, there is Hitler. So we all have something that we are not supposed to be adopting just as because. So we should be criticizing and looking from different perspectives. One of which is the centrality of the Atlantic and happening through slavery. So this is a map that I took from the Slave Route project from UNESCO, which states that in 400 years, almost 8 million people were transported from Africa, specifically to Brazil and to the Caribbean, right? So this happened, and this is like a wound in our humanity, let's say so, but only a few people actually acknowledge that. And by doing that, what colonialism did was they looked at those bodies that had different traits, and they came up with the notion of race. So race became a social construct. It shouldn't matter which color your skin is or which geography you were born, but colonialism put that into perspective, and that became the normal. And the normal now is that we have racism. So we acknowledge and signify some bodies with different color skins as different and inferior to many of us. So that's one of the biggest, and not to talk about gender, right? So many civilizations in the colonized countries, they had different gender balances and different gender roles. They adopted differences in gender, but that was not the European concept of what a woman should do or a man should do. And now we outlive of this reality. So this is important for us to understand. The other theory that highly informs my work is the de-colonial theory, that assumes that colonialism was a historical materiality. It happened in a time. And because of that time, what we live today is another type of colonialism that we call coloniality of power. So the way that we frame reality today allows us to have disputes of power. And those power disputes are highly based on knowledge. So I know better than you, and you should be me. And you should be the way that I want you to be, because that's the normal. So I put this picture there, which is the Treaty of Tordesillas that I'm not sure if everybody knows about, but some point in time in 1494, the world was divided between Spain and Portugal by half, and it was through the Atlantic, through the ocean. So another point, and that was actually the point of departure for the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So, I mean, the Atlantic is central to all of this. One fun fact that the colonial theorists defend is that the very concept of Europe and all it inherited from the Greek and the Romans was actually built because of what we call today Latin America. They needed the colonizers, they needed a reason to justify the extraction, the exploitation, and also the genocide that they produced. So that was the idea of an unified Europe appeared in history. And with that regard, the role of science and technology was critically central, and that's what we defend in that preprint that was desk rejected 3 times already. So I hope that I do gather today at least some criticism, constructive, I guess, I hope. on that paper, because that paper really brings that, the perspective of how science and technology since the colonialism age, how they were represented as benevolent gifts, as how they were given as modernity, as technological development, and how that would make people's lives better, right? So I point out to the dangers of a binary logic. When you adopt global south, global north, colonizer, colonized, when you adopt this binary logic, there's a whole bench of decolonial theory that says that adoption of a binary logic actually brings conflict. And that is not the idea. The idea is actually that we humanize us all, that we identify the human that lives in each of our bodies, and we are leveling ourselves so we can reach something. And I believe that personally, I believe that we reached the point in the planet that there is no planet that will be available to support capitalism as it is today. So if we need to make a big shift, a global society shift, if there is such a thing, then we need to recognize ourselves as equals. So the mindset behind marine biodiversity negotiations is usually transmitting post-colonial and decolonial thought. Why? It's usually looking at the global south through an assistantialism and a tokenism perspective. So this is like, you don't have the ways of doing that, so let me do it for you. So let me develop the science for you. Let me provide you with the evidence that you need to make a decision. So for that, we call, some people call it parachute science, helicopter science. I think that those terms are very fluffy. So I call it colonial science. So it is still today the mindset that we use when addressing scientists from the global south. We think in general, research projects, they invite global south researchers as an aftermath. And tokenism is like they provide some of the finance, some of the funding, but then they take all the equipment back to the global north, leaving and not even acknowledging the contribution of global south researchers. So there is a big movement now from researchers to end colonial science. And so we can actually see how science is political and is elitist in that sense. There's a lot of blame and power, pointing fingers and saying, you did not do your share, you were not able to protect the Amazon, you were not able to set up marine special planning, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, but without actually looking on the reasons why that happened. And what is the mindset that we are playing around here? So that is hugely important. The other thing is the under-implementation of provisions that benefit the South. And I mean, not just for UNCLOS, but almost all UN conventions particularly. In that regard, the part 13 on marine scientific research and part 14 on the transfer of marine technologies, those are under-implemented provisions of UNCLOS that would highly benefit the South on their way of producing the science we need for the ocean we want. So I advocate that ocean science diplomacy research can actually help in that. If we can identify those gaps, identify what the power play is and how it is being played, and what kind of political influence science can have, and how influential diplomacy can be on certain aspects of science, then we could start seeing the hard truth and maybe doing something about it. So just to point to you, this happened yesterday. So those I got from Twitter yesterday. The World Science Forum is happening in South Africa right now. It's the very first time it happens in Africa, in the continent at all. So you start seeing things like somebody from the science diplomacy network saying, I am so impressed by the African scientists who joined and challenged us. Why are you impressed by the African science? Well, it was important for them to highlight that those were African scientists, as they wouldn't be, you know, the same as you and me. Peter Gluckman, who is the president of the International Science Council, he has promoted this narrative that science is the most powerful tool we have to understand our world and address the many crises ahead of us. But today, he said, part of a panel at the World Science Forum on the issue of science and human science. Which science is not human? it's all about making assumptions and giving terms and names to things that actually don't have them. So I think that we should be combating this approach, specifically for marine biodiversity negotiations. And to end with a traditional colonizer family, last year, Prince Williams was actually blaming African population pressure for wildlife. He was telling that Africans are having way too many babies, and then the wildlife was getting lost. And he was saying that while he was expecting his third child. So why can he and why can't Africans have as many kids as they have? So to end with a quote from Paulo Freire, who is a Brazilian philosopher and an educator. He says that liberation is a childbirth and a painful one, but the man or woman who emerges is a new person, viable only as the oppressed contradiction is superseded by the humanization of all people. And that is what I truly believe. So thank you, obrigado, and please, let's open the floor. I want to hear from you. Thank you, Ina.
Thank you, Andrei, for your presentation. We have our discussant for today, who is Christelle Vanneau, a postdoctoral researcher in the Maritime Data Project, who will give the first few comments and insights before we open up for general questions and discussion. So Christelle Vanneau is a postdoctoral researcher at both the Department of Political Science at the University of Vienna and also part of the Maritime Data Project. She's also a research fellow of the Canada Research Chair in International Political Economy at the Université Laval. And her work lies at the intersection of environmental politics, expertise, and international organizations. She has conducted extensive research on the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, to understand its authority from the perspective of its experts networks and careers. She specifically focused on UNEP's expertise responding to areas affected by the global ecological crisis, armed conflicts, and disasters. And in Maritime Data, she specifically addresses the conduct of ocean science and laboratory ethnography in the different case studies that we study. And with this, I hand over to Christelle for the first few remarks, and thank you all.
Thank you, Ina. Just to make sure that everybody can hear me properly. Super. So thank you, Ina, for putting up this ocean seminar, and Alice for this long series of ocean seminars. It's always a pleasure to attend. And today I have the huge pleasure to engage with Andrei's work. So I had the pleasure also to receive a paper that is clearly a work in progress to get a global South perspective on science diplomacy. And so my comment is a reflection of engaging with this writing, as well as a few comments are going to echo a bit your oral presentation, but it is mostly a comment based on the paper. Basically, it's three main comments. One is about the general purpose of the paper. One is about the will be about more the theoretical framework, so to say, the explanation and the use of notions. And then the third one would be the empirical material of the paper and method of analysis that you are engaging with. So the general comment is that broadly the paper as it looks a lot like a literature review of a research problem, which is this coloniality that is present within science diplomacy, or at least that was the reading that I had. Going through it was discovering how you understand the issue and how you may frame it, but it was never how you framed it. It was moving from one angle to another one. So the general comment is that the research problem somehow doesn't feel as completely fixed. So to say, in the introduction, at the end of it, I could not find, okay, what's the question raised and what is the answer provided, or what is the explanation provided. And I think that this general comment, the research problem is not fixed, but then I added a big yet, because it feels that everything is there, but it needs to be reorganized so that we have so that we know. So, and actually, when Alice introduced you at the beginning, she mentioned your perspective, and I'm using a bit this to connect with the presentation to ask, okay, is it your perspective as a Brazilian researcher, or is it as a PhD student, a former PhD student from, I think, Sweden, if I understood correctly, or is it the trajectory, your trajectory yourself within a scientific field? Is it an interdisciplinary discussion of what it is to hold a perspective in diplomacy science? Like, so these were a bit like the general comment with what I wanted to open up, because I think there's a huge potential in the paper, but I think it is still, there's something unclear about what research problem you're raising, and then therefore the writing can only feel as a literature review. So, okay, that being the general comment, and indeed, as I mentioned at the end of the introduction, it was still a bit unclear what's the research question and what is the reader going to learn more widely. So then the structure of the paper in the writing needs to be clarified. Is the participation to international cooperation a social marker that you have experienced yourself, and therefore in your trajectory as a researcher, but also involved in diplomacy, is it what you are delivering? So there would be maybe an ethnographic and a standpoint. And as a matter of fact, you refer to Harding and standpoint theory. So borrowing from feminist theory, at some point I was like, oh, maybe that's the direction the paper is going to take, but no. So that's hence the feeling of literature review. Or is this international cooperation the explanation of inequality practices? Or are you engaging with the research infrastructure being itself, a global inequality? So I think maybe to help a little bit in this, because I don't like to raise comment without thinking of solutions. So maybe I'm too Western. I'm sorry, but I was thinking. I want to ask the paper, in which discipline is it located, or subdiscipline? Because you could find different homes. But it is a bit unclear and becomes difficult, therefore, to put the paper in any journal. And at some point in the paper, I was like, my suggestion, or it makes me think a lot about international political sociology literature, because you're engaging with, structural inequalities. And they have actually, the journal itself made an editorial turn in the recent years to favor Global South authors. And so they might be interested in, your perspective. Is it feminist standpoint theory? Or is the paper a political philosophy or normative IR? So I could see that there was also the work of Alexandra Alejandro. And so there's an interesting backstory to this, which is her own struggle to find a permanent position, which made her, end up in Great Britain, because normative IR theory and actually those political philosophy debates have a home, so to say. So then maybe a journal like Millennium would be interested in receiving this kind of paper. So there, it actually made me think of an article by Basaran and Olson, which is, the title is Becoming International on Symbolic Capital, Conversion and Privilege. Because there you also have a bigger narrative, a global narrative, teared down and analyzed through a trajectory, an intellectual trajectory, because somehow you are providing with an intellectual trajectory of researcher in marine biodiversity involved also in diplomacy. So that could be also another way. So yeah, that's for a little bit the general comment first. When I heard the presentation, I had the feeling that in the end, it seemed that maybe science diplomacy was a case study for you. And there, in the paper, it needs to be very clear. If it's a case study of science diplomacy, then the structure of the paper should reflect this. And an alternative was like, okay, maybe I'm going to learn about science diplomacy practices, the one that are good and the one that are not good. But again, it needs to be structured so that, at the beginning, like you tell us, okay, there are 3 types of science diplomacy practices. And actually in the presentation, you provide in one of the slides, an idea of what science diplomacy practices. So I was like, why doesn't it appear clearly in the paper? So yeah, that's for the general comment. For then the theoretical framework, there are a lot of notions. One you engage with at the beginning, very beginning, is the core periphery notion, and it seemed to be very central. Yet there were no engagement whatever with Wallenstein world system theory, and for me it was a misunderstanding maybe. But how come? Because it's like borrowing from regime theory and not quoting someone who not engaging with the QN, for instance. It would feel a bit weird. So maybe my question would bluntly here would be whether you are providing a global south perspective yourself, or whether you are trying to reject this category because of the historical materialism it produces. And you provide 4 elements that could be explanatory: economy, homogeneity, race, gender, and class, and Western science. But then the paper should be organized using this. Again, it's plenty of choices. The matter, like many things are here, but it's just which choice makes more sense to you. I was a bit skeptical at the notion of co-creation of knowledge, because somehow it does not escape the binary logic of North-South. And it made me think of 2 examples I had in mind, and somehow one is related to the International Council of Science, which is a research platform I studied in my own doctoral research, which is called Future Earth, because they try to co-design with non-scientific actors. They try to do co-creation of knowledge with Global South researchers. Yet in the end, the platform is unable to change the research infrastructure that drives these global inequalities. And the Global South researchers that Future Earth usually invite and get on board in the platform are somehow researchers from the Global South that have been able to get a stability. And so they already have a capital concentrated in their hand, and they are the one who get the recognition from this platform. So somehow it's also reproducing some stuff by applying co-creation. So yeah, that was another small comment. Now the third and last comment was about the empirical material. So it's related to the first comment, which was, whether you want it to be a paper about your intellectual journey, or whether you want to actually really study the practices, then the empirical material changes. And again, it's more a matter of choosing. I think that here it's very important. It felt very important for one reason, which is in the end, ocean science diplomacy practices are very subtle. They don't appear so much. And even in your presentation, you focused much more on your intellectual journey than in providing an insider viewpoint, a standpoint. And if I can conclude maybe on this, I would love to see your standpoint because it seems you have experienced, all this, and it's there in your head. It's already also in the paper, but it's more a matter of, engaging maybe just with the standpoint theory and actually providing an explanation of your standpoint and what you observed, what you went through maybe also, and what practices you've seen that were problematic. And there you can connect again to, like a core periphery, to different arguments. But the structure of the paper would be, based on observation you made. So yeah, and otherwise, I love engaging with this this paper and the topic, because it is tremendously hard to be reflective on this and to provide analysis that are shaking the tree, So thank you a lot.
Thank you, Crystal. That was, wow, massive. I want your email after this. I need it. Well, there's where to start. Well, the first one is framing any of this is really hard. Framing for the purpose of writing, framing for the purpose of presenting, because it is all over, and it is in our daily relationships, in the way that we do things. And there are parts of it that were my theoretical intellectual journey. There are parts of it that were my own personal journey, and I can't separate any of these, actually. So it was really interesting for me to listen to you coming from, and I would assume that you are a scholar on international relations, are you? Yes, I knew it. So if I provide that same paper to an academic from political sciences, and I provide that same paper to an academic of STS, Science and Technology Studies, if Bruno Latour read that paper, everything would be completely different, so that is the hard part of actually being transdisciplinary. So I became this creature, right? I began a biologist. Then I turned to be a public servant working for the Ministry of Science in Brazil. And then I decided to do a PhD on whatever, I have no idea. It's entitled Maritime Affairs, but it could be anything. And I really don't know where I belong, because it is a lot of things all together. It is international relations, it is political science, it is STS, it is philosophy of science, it is developmental work. So there is a lot involved. So I try to, do it all. The motivation of the paper is something that I should be clear about. So that was when we saw that the Global North community of science diplomacy was actually discussing what science diplomacy would be for the Global South without their participation. And that what triggered the whole thing. We needed to step up and, just point to why we are living this until today, why a tweeter from this morning was still making differences between the things that we are advocating for, equality. So in that perspective, I do agree with you, because it is structure was, we debated this for a long time, and I don't know, every time I can't read the paper anymore. Not now. I'll get to it after Carnival next year. I'll look at it again and see, while it's in a preprint exactly for that, so people can comment and discuss and debate, because I got super tired responding editors' rejection letters. The first one was like, oh my God, he was super colonial with us. So we were, and I did answer that because I am triggered by rage in those cases. But if I wanted to use that as a personal narrative, as through the Harding's standpoint theory, or if I would use Jamila Ribeiro, which is a Brazilian philosopher, a Black Brazilian philosopher, feminist, on also similar, she calls it a speech standpoint, then I wouldn't be building that together with my co-authors, and they were really important to me. because I have Janice from India, Gabriela from Brazil, Sam from the UK, and Tim from Germany. And we didn't walk the walk together, but we did talk the talk, you know? So that was like the first step on doing that. Only 2 out of 5 are ocean people, so it wasn't exactly on ocean, although I did bring some examples on ocean. But my standpoint, my positionality is very clear to me. I am a Brazilian, Latino white male who was a biologist, who became, you know, all of those things. I have participated in, you name it, because, you know, my diplomatic missions, usually when we go for negotiations at the UN level, you don't have the guy that understands science diplomacy and the oceanographer and the, no, usually it was me and the diplomat. Now, if you picture that kind of delegation into the BBMJ, let's say, or something smaller even, from a SIDS perspective, from any island in the Caribbean or in the Pacific or in Africa, usually you're only talking about the same diplomat that works with all the subjects. And that guy, he doesn't have enough instructions coming from the capital. He's not well informed on whatever he needs to do, but he has the same voice and the same vote as any other in the room. So that kind of power that science brings to you, like even the physical presence of delegations from developed countries, global north, with 50 people in a room, and, you know, you being alone, even that kind of pressure and power is something very material to me. Something very real to me. And I have a fun fact about the BBMJ. I remember one of the meetings that we were having in New York, and we had to agree to a text, of course, and it was already 2 o'clock in the morning. There was, on a Friday, there was no translation, there was no air conditioning. They had shut down the whole building of the UN, and we were stuck in there. Don't ask me how, but the delegation from New Zealand was able to fly pizzas in the room. And once at 2 a.m., they got fresh hot pizzas passing through the delegations. The negotiation ended in about 40 minutes after that. And nobody told us, you know, and that was how starving we were, hot and tired after 2 weeks of negotiating BBMJ. Was that the best decision? Was that the best thing that we could do? I don't know. The pizzas spoke louder. So all of that in one thing is really hard. So I have, there is a paper coming out, I hope so. It was revised twice and I changed it quite a lot. I started trying to apply storytelling to show my data, and that was a complete disaster. Academia is not ready. Then I went back to the orthodox way of presenting quotes and stuff, and then I got beaten up because I wasn't being traditionally Western science correct into presenting that. So I corrected that again. So what I mean is there is a paper coming out, and that is not my own perspective. It was through interviews that Alice, that I had the pleasure of having Alice to analyze that for my PhD. But delivering that into a journal was extremely tiring, exhaustive, I would say. So there are many things that I want to do that I know that would be better, that would engage better with the public, that would engage better with people that are actually in those rooms, that I can't cross those obstacles unless I behave as a very Western scientist in a Western journal, writing the perfect English, which I don't have. So it's like, you know, sometimes it's really tiring. So I kept thinking that I don't really know if I like academia or not. Sometimes I love it, sometimes I hate it. And I think that most of it's because of the boundaries that we have set up for us. And I would love to break those boundaries. So that would mean that I don't know where do I fit. I don't have any idea where that paper fits. I know it's not biology and physics and chemistry, but apart from that, I really don't know. But I love their comments and I took notes of them, but I really want your email. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre, and also thank you, Christelle, for your comments. I would like to open it up for questions from the audience, or also comments. Maybe you have also similar experiences. I see some scientists in the room. I see some lawyers. It will be interesting to talk also about what do we want to see in BBNJ in this regard. But first to Alice.
Thank you very much, Ina, and thanks, Andre and Christelle. I think we have a really interesting debate. I think I would like to just take one point out, and that's, I think, something that Christelle also mentioned. What needs to be transformed? Is it ocean science diplomacy into practice, or is it diplomacy? So do we need other ways to negotiate ocean protection beyond the kind of multilateral system that has been established? So is diplomacy itself something that needs a revolution or a reform or a transformation? So that would be one question. Because Christelle said, I mean, yes, we have the ocean science diplomatic practices that through the concept that you develop, get some visibility. So I think the cases you had is the All Atlantic Forum, and it's also the UN Decade of Ocean Science. So these you consider as ocean science diplomacy, but at the same time, what is happening in BBNJ, the decisions on how to frame capacity building and technology transfer, to me, this would also be ocean science diplomacy in a way, happening in a very different setting. But then we also have the scientific practices, the research practices, the epistemologies, so the whole science, the ocean science as such, the infrastructures and so on, that may also need some kind of decolonial perspective. So I think that this is really interesting, and I would like to maybe get us into a discussion on this. So is it ocean science diplomacy that needs a decolonial perspective, or is it ocean science and the diplomatic system itself? And what kind of, transformation do we need?
Thanks, Alice. And wow, big question. Well, I can remember in which publication, but there's one of the papers that I actually advocate that we should be looking at the scientific practices first. Specifically looking at science diplomacy, because the way that we do science today, and people assume that the modern, whatever modern means, but the current science method and philosophy is old, and it's not. We're talking about 60, 70 years of Kuhnian's and Popper's perspectives on science. So we can change that, and we should change that, especially now with all the discussions that we have been having on traditional and indigenous knowledge and how to incorporate that. Are we going to apply the science method into scrutinizing those kind of knowledge and traditions? So I do believe that we should be working our way into the philosophy of science on the backstage of how we understand what science is and what science should be. So departing from that perspective, diplomacy is, Sam has a very good saying that he shared once with me, is that diplomacy is the practice of getting everybody evenly unhappy at the same time. So, and I love that perspective because it is true. Well, from me, it is true. So if we inform political leaders or negotiators or whoever the people are there, if we inform them with the best practice that is inclusive, that it has encompassing the knowledge that we have available, what is important for local communities, what is important for those most vulnerable to the challenges that we're living today, I think that the diplomacy will slowly incorporate that. But that's in the practice of diplomacy, right? In the research of international relations, I guess that at least that's what I learned, the role of science and technology was so undermined throughout the scholarship. So there is a value there as well to raise how important science and technology has been. And the ocean in that regard brings a really different perspective, very interesting on how science and technology actually shaped some of the diplomatic negotiations. So instead of us using the same indexes as GDP and economic growth, and we should be looking at social sustainability, ecosystem sustainability with different indexes. It's not just about placing monetary value, so diplomacy will take this for serious, but it's about the core values that we bring as societies, and those core values will absolutely change between even inside the same country, as in the case of Brazil, for certain. So we should be really working local, studying regional, and mainstreaming global. So that's what I believe. Did I answer your question, Alice?
Well, I think there is no answer to my question, but I think
good.
what you are saying is that we need like a transformation of values across the globe to actually bridge the big gap that colonial history has created between the global north and south. Yeah, and I think this is extremely difficult. And how you phrase it, we need to change science. It puts, I think, a lot of burden on the shoulders of the scientists, but I don't think the scientists are the problem, So they maybe produce a way of thinking and doing research. Yeah, but maybe there are others that want to engage in the discussion as well.
Okay.
Yes, Sita, nice to see you again. You are muted. Sita, we cannot hear you, or at least I cannot hear you.
No, I was muted, still muted. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for your interesting presentation, and I really like the parts where you, or dislike the parts where you stated the northern comments on the biodiversity loss in the global south, about the Amazon and the population and the wildlife nexus in Africa, because I think there's really a divide between the developed comfort zone in the north and the conservation and the south that now has to be conserved, because there's much more biodiversity left in the south. And I think northern science is really a strong driver to pursue these interests. So, and in Europe, we really forget that we are in the post-biodiversity loss phase. So, for example, Germany was covered 100% by primary forest, and now we have 0. So every space we use is built on this biodiversity loss. We are not changing this. And then there is an interesting German narrative that the forest in Germany, the primary forest, was cut by the Romans. The Germans say we were colonized, and the colonizers cut our forests, but it's not true. And I think this is really a very important topic to see these narratives from the north about the biodiversity loss in the south, because the north could recover their biodiversity, but they don't do it because of comfort and economic reasons. So yeah,
absolutely true. Well, I'm not taking out our blame, So Brazil for the last 4 years had a government that didn't at all protect many of the environments that we have, ocean, land. So that's something that usually happens, and we should be able to fight back and guarantee those, right? So in that case, the international pressure was really important. So we have the Amazon Fund. Norway took all the money out of Amazon Fund, and a lot of money that was invested in protecting the forest, and with research projects they just stopped. So that is a power play too that can actually go for the benefit of the environment. But the narrative that you're pointing out is something quite amusing for me as well. I lived in Sweden, and I lived in the south of Sweden. You don't see a tree where you go across the south of Sweden the whole time, only farms and plantations and a lot of things. So you could see a nature here or there. And the discourse, the social discourse on the preservation of the environment, on, you know, the cleanup and doing this and doing that was so even aggressive, I would say, that I could easily see them turning their heads to other places in the world in which there are forests still, or coral reefs, and, you know, and telling them the same thing. You should be protecting the way that we are, you know, but nobody's actually looking at the history. So what happened?
Well, and even nowadays, the North is not really doing a lot. So
yeah, there's that too, but there's
to recover space.
But there's a mentality that actually, it's like, if I, with the climate convention, right? Can I pay you to restore carbon in your land? So why is it different from, this is very contentious, I know, but why is it different from colonialism? You know,
can
I get your trees? Can I get your gold?
100%.
Can I get everything?
Yeah.
No. So now it's, can you place all the garbage, all the carbon in your land? So I can pay for it. I'll pay for it. So, but where the money come from? How did you become that rich that you can pay somebody to do something for you?
Yeah,
so it's
I think
it's always this subaltern relationship, you know, like not we, but somebody has to serve somebody else, and, you know, the hierarchy. And I'm kind of sick of that.
Yeah, and I think it's 100% colonial to buy people, or to tell them they have to conserve, they have to use the space for conservation, and the North doesn't do it. I mean, we have conservation, but not in that amount. And there's and I was in Brazil in 2019 when the big fires were there. So, and I was, like you were, impressed by the lack of trees in Sweden. I was so impressed by the amount of trees in Brazil. So I was I have family in Sao Paulo, and you drive out of Sao Paulo and it's all forest. Not all, but so much forest and so much space used for biodiversity. And in the same time, I read the European media, and I thought I must be in the desert. The European media coverage about Brazil, because it was just like telling the whole of Brazil is burning. I don't want to back your former president. I don't want to back his politics, but the narratives are so strong that in the North, the people are told, in the South, they destroy everything. And in the South, there is the view that conservation is really big and great in Europe, and that's not true.
And the risk of generalization, right? Because Brazil, it's something else. It's different. We are big. We are like, I don't know, the 10th, 11th economy in the world. If you look at smaller countries, even here, the neighbors in South America, their struggle is real. Getting people to eat, getting, you know, the basics. Even here, the number of starving people in Brazil has raised quite a lot. So what would you tell a mother that wants to feed their kids that she wouldn't take down a tree if she would be getting, you know, food? So yeah, I don't know. But thank you, Sita.
Yeah, thank you.
We have Claudia, and then we have some people in the chat. So Claudia first.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Andrei, for your presentation. I thought it was super interesting, and I've been more interested recently in this topic of decolonization as well, our role as players in the science to policy interface. And I personally find this quite challenging in terms of how to change something in practice. I actually work on the EU-Mercosur negotiations as well next to my ocean governance work. So I've heard this narrative quite often from the Brazilians that we work together with, where we of course have the European side that's kind of imposing their values in terms of deforestation on the Brazilians. And I just came back from Tanzania from a workshop on marine spatial planning, and it was very interesting because I spoke to someone from the government and who's talking about deep seabed mining, and he said we are pushed in all certain directions from international organizations to support a moratorium on deep seabed mining, but actually we don't have enough information on what the different sides want, or we're basically being lobbied, but we lack the information to take an informative decision. So a lot of African countries, they prefer to wait to basically inform themselves before being pushed into a certain decision, which I thought was quite interesting. But that he said that in that way. And you see this as well, I think, with marine protected areas. For example, there's a lot of Western NGOs or funders that try to persuade developing countries to protect areas or marine areas. Also, I was thinking, I really liked your slide on this capacity building element. And this is the second time that I hear about the fact that capacity building technology transfer is actually itself a colonial, can be considered a colonial aspect or seen from this perspective. And of course, the package deal of DB&J negotiations has been decided a very long time ago. So we cannot really change the terminology. I guess it's too late to change this, but I was wondering if you have any ideas or thoughts on what we as maybe people that work on science policy interface could keep in mind next time we speak to people from the government from developing countries. Because in practice, we do often hear, especially when we talk about areas beyond national jurisdiction, that negotiators or people working for the Ministry of Environment, they often mention we need more capacity, we need more capacity. So sometimes I ask them, what kind of capacity do you really need? Is it really the information? Do you need more expertise within the country? And I find it's not always clear, maybe even to the people themselves who mentioned this, we need more capacity, what type of capacity is necessary. So I'm not really sure how my role myself could be as well, to not be perceived as decolonizer, because I am quite conscious of this fact that when I go to Tanzania, for example, last week, or I've also organized workshops in Ecuador and Peru. I find this every time I'm in this position that I'm teaching people something or providing capacity building workshops. And at the same time, with feedback is that everybody thinks it's very useful, but how can we address this in a better way, in your opinion, while considering the fact that there are still a lot of experts in the global south or from developing countries that might need more knowledge on areas beyond national jurisdiction, for example, or deep seabed mining, to fully participate in these kind of negotiations.
Thanks, Florian. That's super interesting. So I usually, I think that it should come from the personal perspective for the very first thing. And that is because if we don't change the way that we see the other, or if we don't stop othering people, we usually tend to position ourselves in a different way. So usually my advice is something that I have been trying to change myself, and I'm telling you, it's not easy. I ask. So what do you need? What is your perspective on this? Can I learn? Can you tell me? So I learned quite a lot in this 4 years, in this 3 years as a PhD student, because I started doing that, and I did that with my kids. It's at home, everywhere. An interesting fact is you will hear everybody saying we need capacity, because it is true, they need capacity. But if you ask them what kind of capacity do you need, they usually don't know, because they didn't have like a survey. So maybe that would be a good start. So if you are organizing seminars and events in those countries, and you feel that you're not, ask them, so what is that you want me to address? What do you think that I can contribute? Or start the event with a big round table instead of, you know, the usual stuff of I present you, you hear, I speak. You just say, okay, so let's sit together. Let's do like a dynamic, a group work here, so we can understand what are you expecting from this event and how we can address that and change, be flexible. I don't know if that's a good idea. I try to do that now, especially now.
Great, thank you. We have a question in the chat that is a little bit going into a similar direction from Abbas Yusuf, who asks, how can the developing states or the third world countries or the global south initiate or create the ocean diplomacy? So how can it come from them? And then we go to Sika. I did see you.
Sorry, I have, now that I saw, I have a lot of direct messages to me in the chat. So, you know, I'll need to find a way to copy those after. So Abbas, yes, thank you. Actually, if I may say, the only reason why we have a Sustainable Development Goal 14, life underwater, was because of the SID's influential role in the diplomatic negotiation of the SDGs. And only them were able to fight for a specific sustainable development goal in the ocean. So that is ocean diplomacy right there. Ocean diplomacy is all over for all of us. You yourself, Abbas, when you had the discussions about the piracy on your coast, that was completely ocean diplomacy. No question about that. And you already do that. So what I think that we should be doing is, if we were able to find some seed money or some political will to do exactly the survey that I was speaking to Claudia about, if we know the gaps really, what we need to have, it would be much easier for us to negotiate better international deals for the support of science.
Perfect. We go to Sita, and I did see, Maria, you posted an article. Thank you for this. Maybe if we have some time in the end, you can say a few words on this also, because, yeah, of the Portuguese. Sita.
Sorry that I raised my hand again, but I have a comment to Claudia. So especially the African group has a really strong contribution made to the International Seabed Authority about the capacity building they need. So there's no gap in the need. So they have demanded it, but there's a lot of dislike in African countries about that the International Seabed Authority is not delivering the capacity building that is demanded by those states. And the African group has been so strong at the International Seabed Authority, and unity was always very important for them, for the southern countries in general, because Andrei told sometimes they are alone for their state, and so for them the unity between the states is very important with the same interests. And African states also say, and other states also say that the International Seabed Authority, the secretary within the capacity building that is taking place, they are trying to break the unity, to weaken the power of the global south states.
I don't know. I don't want to comment on that.
Yeah. Let's see if we have more questions. So maybe Maria, do you want to say a few words on the article? If not, then I also have.
I think I know what Maria is speaking about,
Yeah,
because
sorry,
there's
if you want, I can talk about it.
Go ahead, Maria.
Yeah, it's just that I read it today, and Andrei was talking about the political position of this last government, Brazilian government, and it's like not everybody here thinks like the president, so people are trying to do everything about it, and it's very difficult to see that. It's sometimes we feel like it's the world against Brazil, but it's like more like the world against this president, especially. But feel free to comment, Andrei.
I just have one thing to say, is that just today, this government right now actually created the very first National Ocean Research Institute in the country. But this was a fight that we have been having for the past 10 years. But it came out today, a decree, a presidential decree. So absolutely, Maria is completely right. There were a lot of subversive people working on the backstage, doing whatever it took. Many of my colleagues are terribly ill because of that. They are really, really tired and sick. Mental health issues, but they fought the good fight and we didn't lose at all. So it is a good moment as well. So we have some joyful sides, but things are changing. Hopefully next year Carnival will be more beautiful and we will become 6 times champions of the World Cup in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you for these insights. Do we have any more questions or comments or experiences that you want to share or thoughts? If not, I have a last question for you, Andrei, for everyone. So what does this mean for BB&J or the Ocean Decade? So what would you like to see? How would you like to see it changing? What would, do you have any specific things that you can think of that would maybe go towards a bit of a better direction?
All right, so let's start with the BB&J, which is easier because we're almost there. I think that the BB&J was a wonderful exercise, a learning curve for all of us. So the plastic treaty shall not follow the same path. I hope not. So many things that we were very stuck into the negotiation format and the way that we move forward were not exactly functioning. But now I think that we'll finally get there. Now about the decade. As long as the decade is really trying to reproduce those old habits of more science, but without any clear indication of science for what, I think we're going to be doing the same thing as we have been doing before. So, and there's actually another paper that I'm revising now that if accepted, I actually say that this decade should be all about crossing disciplines and engaging with the public. So the 7th and last objective of decade that was adopted way before the decade was agreed, the one on ocean literacy, should be the very first one. So ocean literacy should be the main outcome of this decade. We should be able to explain to the public what is the impact of the ocean and you and your impact back in the ocean. That, if that is achieved in 10-year time, I'm super happy, because that's for me what we lack. Unless we do work with people and we understand that people are different, it's not the same ocean for everybody, it's not the same science for everybody, we are not going to be doing achieving the ocean we want. Who is the we? What ocean do I want? What ocean do you want? It's completely different. So the science we need, the science I need is completely different from the science a lot of people need, and I know that. So it's this global narrative usually doesn't work when you're dealing with, an anarchic system such as the ocean.
Interesting. Have you thought about links to space? Because space is often compared to ocean as also this, beyond national jurisdiction.
So it's like Antarctica and space are usually the global commons, right? So the physical global commons. you have the ocean, you have Antarctica, and you have space. If you think about the space and Antarctica, it's a close group of 20-something countries. Those are the people deciding the, the future of that. That is so true for Antarctica as it is for the space programs. Not everybody is able to participate in that, so it's a very elite thing. But the ocean, everybody has a say. Everybody has a stake. All of us, actually. And then things change quite much. The same thing for the climate, which is not, the atmosphere, is more than the atmosphere, all the interrelationships that we have between all the systems that govern this planet. That is also global common. That is highly disputable now. So even the practices of denying science are getting now more followers because they couldn't find, science was not humble enough to accept its own mistakes and errors. And the statistical errors and the way that the models were built. And if we don't learn from this, then I don't know what's left. So no, I think the ocean is a unique space. It's everybody's stakes, and 100 and something countries negotiating UNCLOS, the BBNJ. It's a nightmare. When you go to take a decision at the Antarctic Treaty, it takes a long time, but it's not, endless. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. And thank you also for your positive ideas and thoughts, how, this could maybe be different in the future.
Hopefully. We are all here to do that, right? We're all passionate about this.
So if there's no other question or comment, I would introduce our upcoming session. So thank you very much, first of all, of course, to Andrei and Christelle, and obviously Elise for hosting the seminar series. We have an additional one planned already for January, which I would like to invite you to as well. So I'm just going to share my screen for 1 minute and show you. So we have upcoming on the 18th of January, again, the European afternoon session on climate change and the deep sea. So Professor Lisa Levin from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography is going to talk about science policy perspectives in this regard. And unfortunately, she had to leave a little bit early today, but yes, you will meet her next time. With this, I will hand over to Alice for a few last words and wish you all a good rest of the year and hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. Ina, I think it's the next slide. Can you go to the next slide in the presentation?
Which one? This
I see the slide with Andrei on it. So
the other one. Yeah, the first one, you mean? From Andrei's session?
Maybe I see it wrong. It's on the screen that we shared. I just see the.
Do you not see the screen? Sorry, guys. So we have
no problem. We will, anyways. You will hear from the next session on Twitter, and we will also put it on our homepage. So thank you very much. We will also circulate a newsletter close to Christmas, where you can see all information from the project, and you will also get links to all previous sessions. So we will circulate this in our newsletter, and you can also get access to the links on our homepage. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you very much, Ina, for moderating, and Christelle for this excellent comments. So see you all soon and next year. Bye.
Thank you. Happy holidays, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah, happy holidays.
Thank you. Bye-bye.